All right, good people. We're just gonna jump in real quick, and I already kind of started screen sharing. Um, um, so for those of y'all who were able to come to last session, we were talking a lot about wrapping up, talking about like front end stuff, and just like thinking about like how how to get to the point where after we've built our websites, we're able to like show them off to people, right? And when we were doing that, we talked about how in order to do that, we're going to need a server, right? And if you remember when we first started talking about kind of front end and back end stuff, we talked about how a server is just essentially a computer that acts as, my bad. A server is just a computer that acts as a responder to different requests, for lack of better words. Well, that's the only word to use. So basically, computers are always connecting and talking to one another, and one computer is always talking to one to receive information, and one is meant to respond to information being asked for. And in those conversations, right, the computer that's looking to receive information is called the client, and the computer looking to respond to requests is called the server, right? So client server model is a really important part of kind of the front end, back end dichotomy. So just quick knowledge check, show of hands or thumbs, right? If you understand what I'm talking about when I say client server and kind of two computers talking, give me a thumbs up because I know that y'all are rocking with me and we're on the same page here. That's great. Because I remember when we first started, not everybody knew these things. And so hopefully we're starting to put the pieces together. So we started off talking about HTML and CSS, which is the language and markup language and style framework that we use to create websites, right? We built a couple websites ourselves. We even talked last week about how we could host them using a server. And we used GitHub Pages as an example of a server that was set up in a way that made it easy for us to put our site up on for others to view, right? Behind the scenes, there's two things that the GitHub Pages thing was doing for us. The first was it was creating a server. And the second was it made that server, it made that computer and that server at that particular port publicly accessible for people across the web to interact with, right? So this week, we're going to be kind of breaking those two steps down so that y'all can understand how will we set those things up on our own, which is really getting us into like thinking more about backend stuff. So a lot of what we'll be focusing on in the next couple minutes is just backend focused stuff. So after this session, you should walk away with a lot more knowledge on, okay, how do I create a server, right? So yeah, if you're ready to dive in, you know what I'm saying, give your boy a thumbs up so I know we out here and we can get rocking. Cool. I see a good amount of y'all. I bet. Thank you. So what to say about servers? I'm going to share my screen real quick and kind of just talk a little bit first. First thing I want y'all to know is we can create servers in a bunch of different languages. So long as, in order to create a server, we're actually going to be working with processes on our current operating system or the computer operating system to open up a port and basically allow for that port to receive incoming traffic and essentially allow for for certain files or functions to run when someone like looks for a specific request. But there's a number of different languages that allow for us to work with our machine, our operating system directly, right? If we wanted to choose a language, right? So like the top three, I think in this case that might come to mind off the top for me, right? JavaScript, Python, and even Java, right? All three of those languages have a way for us to write code that can be used in the backend. So in the JavaScript sense, when it comes to kind of backend programming, what you'll hear people talk a lot about first in the JavaScript landscape is a runtime engine called Node. So Node is a runtime engine in JavaScript that allows for you to work with JavaScript outside of the browser. So we kind of talked about how the HTML, CSS, front-end stuff we need to know to build our websites, but JavaScript is what makes our websites more interactive. We talked about how the browser is built in a way that allows for us to just process JavaScript, right? Every website can run a little bit of JavaScript in the browser. But when you want to run JavaScript outside of the browser, like for like backend stuff, you need some type of an engine to run JavaScript for you in the backend. And so the engine that we use to do that is Node. So if ever you're looking and you're seeing people say, oh, you should know Node, they're saying you should know how to use JavaScript to create things in the backend. Node basically allows you to run JavaScript, just run JavaScript files on your in your machine. But when it comes specifically to the context of creating servers, there's another library that becomes really helpful in JavaScript called Express. And Express is a simple framework in JavaScript that uses Node to allow for you to create a server in JavaScript code. So in a second, I'll show you this as an example, but this is just JavaScript, right? If you were talking about Python and you're like, oh, like I want to do some backend stuff in Python, right? Well, Python is in and of itself is considered a backend language because it works directly with your operating system, right? You can just write Python in the command line. But if you're getting interested in doing like work on server side stuff with Python, right? One framework that's really helpful to learn is called Flask, which is a Python framework specifically for creating servers. And in a second, we'll kind of look through some of the documentation here. And I think what we'll see is that there's a lot of stuff that's similar here between kind of what Express and it does for JavaScript and with what Flask does for Python. And similarly in Java, a lot of there's languages and frameworks that we can use in Java as well to create servers and basically create APIs and stuff. The most common right now.
Should we install Flask and Node?
You don't have to right immediately, but it depends. I'm bringing this up mostly for you to, you get to choose which ones you use. So I would say that's up to you based on the circumstances of what you're going to build. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So go ahead, Kevin.
Like what's the one they use more like in the real world? Like, do you see more people use like Python or Java, or does it really depend?
It really just depends on the team you're on, the preferences you have within the stack, and what kind of what are you trying to accomplish with the what are you trying to accomplish with the server? So like in, if you're building an application and the majority of the application is in JavaScript, right? Sometimes it makes sense to just keep your stack in JavaScript, right? But if your stack is in Python, same, right? You might end up using a little bit of Python because it helps you, right? Each language also has different pros and cons, right? One of those are the types of things you as an engineer have to kind of learn to identify the nuances. But today, the goal wasn't really to kind of introduce the debate, but to just kind of show you that like backend stuff, no matter which language you choose, has frameworks in place for you to do similar things. And so today I'm going to talk through Node and Express in JavaScript, because I do think it's worth learning a little bit of JavaScript. And For folks who pulled up on our last class, I had already started talking a lot more about JavaScript on Thursday. So I think that I'm gonna continue there, but I'm bringing Python up because if you choose to do it in Python, cool. You know what I'm saying? If you choose to do it in Java, cool. It's more about the concepts at a high level that I want y'all to take away.
So we're
for the
just
purpose of
creating a
today.
server as a group or individually?
Yeah, we're jumping ahead a little bit. So today I'm just trying to talk through it, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Is that cool?
Sorry.
It's all good. And like my girl's like, I just want a hack. I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get there. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about server side stuff and creating a little couple servers. And I just wanted to kind of walk y'all through the process so you understand what's going on there. And then, of course, to Isabel's point, we'll be working on building out some servers for ourselves too. So yeah, big point is no matter what language you choose in the back end, there's frameworks in place for you to do. There's frameworks in place for you to there's frameworks in place for you to build out your server side stuff in these different languages. It just is a matter of knowing what you're trying to do and being like, oh, okay, bet. Like, so like, if I know I want to do the same stuff that I'm talking about now in Java, I might be like, how do I build a server in Java, right? That way, then, you know, oh, the stuff I know is possible that we just talked about, I can do in all these different systems and stuff. But yeah, we'll be focusing on the JavaScript side for right now. But I know some of y'all might choose to do some stuff in Python or Java as time goes on in the class. So yeah, if you want to follow along with me and do this, build the server out in JavaScript, I'll go through kind of what you got to do and from the beginning. Again, this is being recorded too, so you can always look back at the YouTube video. But yeah, so the first thing you need to do in order to like build out a server in JavaScript is you need to install Node on your machine. And so Node is very simple to install. Just go to nodejs.org and you can download the this LTS is like the most stable version. So this is probably the best one to install on your machine. And when you install Node on your machine, it actually comes with two commands in the terminal for you. The first command is node. So you should be able to do kind of something like node version and get back a version number. Node allows us to, like I said, process those JavaScript files. And in a second, I'll show you what I mean by that. The other thing that comes installed with Node when you install it on your machine is a package manager called npm. And npm is short for the Node package manager, and it is a particularly important part of working in Node and JavaScript. Most languages have some package manager, library manager that allows for you to basically bring in other libraries that might be helpful for your code as you're writing. In JavaScript, Node and npm are how we do that, right? So Node is what we use to run the code, but npm is the package manager. So we will use npm to be able to find packages that are full of JavaScript code that we can use in order to build out more robust applications. And so one of those examples of a package is Express, which is a specific JavaScript package for creating servers and running the servers in Node. So first, all you gotta do is just download Node. Node will come installed with npm, and then npm will allow us to use Express. As you can see here, this is the command we gotta use to use Express. What we're building here, right? So let me just kind of show you a simple, let's see if they show us a like simple example. So I guess we can go through it and it'll come up. We'll just walk through the getting started guide on how to use Express, and in it we'll see that we're going to be creating a couple interesting files to start our project. So first thing first, we have to install Node, like I just said, right? And now let's say we're trying to build a new server-side project, right? So this is the steps that it's suggesting as you're going through it, right? If you're building a project, you're gonna probably create a folder for that project. After getting into that folder, this is where you would set up all the files for yourself, right? So I'm gonna do something similar. Just go to this empty VS Code window, and then I'm gonna basically just kind of just start a new project. I like to make sure my projects are being saved in an appropriate folder. So first thing I'm gonna do is just actually open up the terminal in VS Code. And instead of just saving my project in this default location, I'm just gonna just navigate to a couple folders that I've created to just store code that's like temporary code that I'm just working with. So in this folder, I can make a new project. So I'm just gonna make a new project, and I'm just gonna call it server-side JS. And I'm just gonna change into that folder. And now I'm just gonna reopen VS Code with that folder so that I can make sure that the files will show up in the right way in VS Code. So I just do this sometimes just to make sure that I'm saving the file in the right place and I know where it's being saved. Cool. So with that new folder open, now I can clearly I can create new files using the VS Code kind of icons and GUI, but also I can reopen that terminal, and now that terminal will be running inside of that specific folder. Whoops. Oh, it's just taking a minute. Okay, cool. So basically what they said here, create the folder in K directory, my app. I did that just in the terminal, changed into the directory. I opened it in VS Code, which isn't a step there. But now it says, okay, now that you have your folder for your project, right, and your files, now you can run a command after installing Node, right? So first you're gonna wanna make sure you have the Node installed, like I did Node version, right? So I got Node in there, which means npm is in there too. And because npm is in there, I can use the npm command to run this next line of code, this npm init. And so let's just take a look at what that does for us when I run npm init. Npm init is a kind of command line utility that runs, that allows you to initialize a new Node project. So it tells you here, this utility will walk you through creating a package JSON file, right? Shorthand, you can just press enter, and at each step of the way, it's asking you a question like, okay, well, what do you want this package to be called? In this, I can just let this, I can press enter here. Version, I want it version 1, makes sense. Description, I can just press enter here. Entry point is which file should we create for you? That's gonna be kind of your main file for this JavaScript Node project. And so I'm gonna let it stay as index.js. Test command, I'm just gonna press enter to keep going, git repository. So some of these I don't have to name, I don't really have to change much. Just press enter, and so it'll give you a preview of all the stuff it's gonna create for you. Is this okay? I'm just gonna say yes, and boom. So it creates a file called package.json, which is a really important file in backend JavaScript. because all backend JavaScript projects use Node to get established. And the package.json file is basically like, I don't know why it's coming to my mind to say it like this, but I'll just say it's like your table of contents. It kind of really details out like more information about your project, so that you're as you're running the code, this is kind of like the hub of like which file is the most important. Here's where we define some scripts. A lot of the most important information about your backend project is in this file. Go ahead to the folks that raise their hand. I can't see who it was.
I guess that was me.
ahead,
I don't know if anybody else did it, but my question is, would we consider this the metadata?
You can consider this metadata for the sake of like the backend project you're creating. But when you say metadata, are you referring to like when we were talking about on the front end that there was like metadata that we would create on the front end, or are you just saying in general?
When I think of metadata, I usually go back to my database classes, and then when we have like a database, we also have the metadata that describes kind of the contents of the database, how it's like orchestrated, how it's structured, and all that. So that's where my mind goes when I'm thinking of it. So when I see this, I'm thinking, okay, kind of like it's describing how it's set up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say in that case, yes, I would say you could consider this metadata in that degree.
Okay, thank you.
Did somebody else have a question? I feel like I saw two hands. Okay, bet. Once you do the npm init in your project, it'll create that new package for you. And that index.js file where it says entry point index.js basically is saying that, okay, whenever we run this code, what's the main file that we're gonna attempt to use? And so index.js in this case is what we're gonna use. So as you can see, there is no index.js file. So later we'll probably end up creating that file and writing some JavaScript inside of it. And so just to kind of, so before I kind of go into the Express side of stuff, let me just do that so I can show you what I mean about how we use Node to run the JavaScript, right? So I'm just gonna create a new file in here, call it index.js. And then inside of this index.js file, I'm just gonna write a little bit of JavaScript. I'm just gonna write, so I'm gonna leave a comment first to say print hello world, right? So to print something in JavaScript, we use the console.log function, right? And this takes in some data, anything that you want to print. So I'm gonna create a string and I'm gonna say print hello world, right? So this would be like hello world in JavaScript. Typically though, right, when we're running JavaScript, like we kind of talked about last week, in order to run JavaScript, we would run it in a website, and then in the inspector on the console, right, we would be able to go to the console, and then that's where we'd see that, that's where we would see that print statement. But clearly we're not trying to, this isn't a JavaScript file that's tied to a web page, this is backend stuff. So the question is, oh, well, where would that thing print, right? So what Node does is it creates a runtime engine for us to run our JavaScript strictly on our machine. So let me just clear this. So now that I have this index.js file, I can use the command node, and I can say node index.js, which basically is saying, hey, Node, run the file index.js. And so in doing that, right, it basically takes that JavaScript file and it runs it. And then the function that we wrote in here gets printed, right? So this is a super simple example of kind of like JavaScript lightweight way, right? So clearly I'm using a comment, I'm using a function that's pre-built, which is the print function in JavaScript. I'm creating a variable. But as you can hopefully imagine, this could get way more complicated in terms of what functions and variables and conditionals or anything I do in this file. But I'd use the node to eventually run the JavaScript file. If that makes sense so far, just give me a thumbs up so I know y'all still kind of rocking me in that part of the process. Cool. And so I know that y'all don't know, some of y'all might, but I know not everybody here is familiar with JavaScript. And the purpose of today isn't really like we're gonna dive deep into like super fundamental JavaScript stuff yet. We can talk about that in different setting, but for the purpose of the high level conversation, I won't focus so much on the syntactic stuff. I just want to kind of show you like the server side stuff that is really important to take away from this. So let's just continue with this Express tutorial of just getting our app running with Express. After creating a package.json, what we need to do in order to actually build the server in Express is to install it so that we have it as a package to use. So back in the terminal, I'm just going to run npm install Express, which is basically using that node package manager that I was talking to you about before to install a package called Express. And Express is a node package clearly that, like I said, allows for us to create servers in the JavaScript side. So this is what allows us to create these web servers. As you can see, super popular library, 25 million people downloaded it just this week. So super popular in the real world. So a lot of backend devs definitely are using Express and Node. But just as many, I'd say I'd probably use a Python, Flask, or Java and Spring or something like that too. Cool, so we install Express and it says now we can go to the next step. I will show you this though. When you install a package in npm, right, a couple things happen on the JavaScript side. First, it runs some code in the terminal to actually install the files from that particular package. And after it does that, you can see a new folder gets created in your project called Node Modules. The Node Modules folder is a folder in JavaScript that just holds your frameworks, like libraries that you install in JavaScript using npm. It also creates a package-lock.json, which is just another file that keeps track of like what packages have you installed over time. In the Node Modules folder would be any part of any libraries that we need to then, ultimately get this Express library in here. So not only did it install Express, it installed all of the other libraries that needed to be installed for Express to even run for us. So cool. So now that we have, and then the last thing I'll show you is that when you install packages in JavaScript as well, they get added to your package.json as a dependency. So for all those folks who are going to end up doing JavaScript stuff on the back end, just knowing the package.json is like Benjamin was saying, like your metadata of the project is important because this is also where you'd see like, oh, what files or what libraries do I need to install to make this project run? Cool, so that's neither here nor there. We have the Express library clearly installed in our project. So now we can get to the part of building out our server. So Express creates applications using JavaScript that allow for us to then launch a server on our machine. So here's an example of what that would look like in code, right? So without getting too in the weeds of the JavaScript details, right? Clearly, we're just kind of bringing in that library, that Express library. We're instantiating it or running it creating a variable called app, right? Here you see we're doing something like setting a port to a specific number. And then you see one function here. This is a JavaScript function. I know the syntax might look a little funky for y'all who might not be familiar, but this is just a function in JavaScript that's taking that variable called app, and it's running a function called get. And and it's passing some parameters in there. And then this is the body of the function, which basically is saying, send something, right? Send this string hello world. Then we see another function down here. First we saw app.get, now we see app.listen. It takes in that port variable that we established before. And again, here's another JavaScript function. And it says this function does what we talked about just now. It prints console.log is like print in JavaScript. And it's printing this string that says example app listening on port, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just gonna copy this just for the sake of the example. And I'm gonna go to this index.js file that we had before, and I'm just gonna paste it in there. So I'll save this, and now now that I have it in here, I'm just gonna run the commands necessary to get that JavaScript to run, right? So again, like we saw before, in order to run the JavaScript, I have to do node and then the name of the file. So this file is called index.js. So I'll call node.index.js, and boom, now we see this thing that says example app listening on port 3000. Okay, so well, what does that mean for ourselves? Well, something is running and it's saying on port 3000. So I'm gonna go to my machine and I'm just gonna go type in localhost 3000. And so a website pulls up or something pulls up, right? And we see that hello world is returned there. I'll zoom in a little bit for y'all, right? So what's going on here, right? If you recall from some of the last classes when we were talking about the live server or the VS Code extension for live server, we saw something similar happen, except the live server had a different number after this when it ran, right? Essentially what we just did with that little bit of code was create a server on our machine that's running locally. And so to access it, we have to use our local IP address, which is shorthanded as localhost on your machine. And with the colon to then say, we're going to specify a specific port and then a port number. The port number is very important because your machine has all types of different ports that are running. And those, you can run specific things on different ports of your machine and direct traffic or direct people to it. So this code, if we look back at it, created a port, we called it 3000. And at port 3000, it said, first when it ran, right, it said that it was, when it started up, right, we saw that it printed this message. And then I did something very specific, right? I went to this particular port on my machine, localhost 3000. And in doing that, right, in going to that site, clearly this hello world thing ran. So what's going on here, right? What's happening? This is what I'm saying is what we do when we're creating backend and server stuff. It's this process that is at a high level what I wanted to talk about today. At a high level, what's going on is, one, we created the local server and we specified a specific port that local server is going to run on. The way we created the local server was contextual to JavaScript, right? We used Express, and Express needed to run, created an app, and the app has certain functions that allow for us to launch the server, right? As well as to then create what we call in the server side space routes, right? Routes are essentially paths that somebody can be looking to access on a server that then respond with some type of function or file or data, respond with data, basically. They can respond with a function that sends data, or they can respond with just the data itself. So clearly in this case, we're responding by sending hello world, right? To just kind of make the case here, right? Think about when you go to a website, you just type in the name of the website and you press enter. And if you remember, I asked y'all this question when we first started talking, what happens when you go to a website? Like what happens when I go to like google.com and then press enter, right? And we talked about there was a very specific process that happens in the background whenever you do that. Does anybody remember what that process is, or want to kind of just break that down for us? Like what happened when I went to google.com and just press enter before it reloaded and all of this? Anybody want to take a stab at just answering? You know, nobody want to try.
I've been talking a lot, so I'll give it to someone else.
Go ahead, bro.
I mean, like, all right, I guess I'll do it. All right, man. I'll be honest, I don't remember exactly word for word what you said.
Try your best. Bro.
So from my understanding, okay, so we're gonna go to google.com.
Right.
Google.com has its own IP address.
Mhm.
So we're requesting, hey, I want to go to this website, and then it finds, I forget what it finds, but I guess it finds the IP, and then it directs you to it, I guess, a port or something. It says, hey, open and go in there, and then you get there. That's a terrible explanation. But
it's better.
You're shaking your head, so at least you got something.
No, it's better. It's better than silence, but it definitely is definitely getting there. Anybody want to chime in and add to what Benjamin is saying? Because you're completely right, bro. But anybody want to add to what he's saying and kind of give some more context? What's going on? But when I press enter on a website in the browser before it shows me this page,
it creates like a rudimentary search and prints out like all the possible websites that match with the inputted words you put in or something.
So it takes these words, right, and which we call a domain, right, and then it does something like searching, like Isabel saying, and Benjamin mentioned it, pulling back an IP address. There's a specific thing that's doing that. That if anybody remembers, can drop it in the chat. Maybe somebody did already, but there's a specific thing going on that takes the domain and maps it to an IP address. Anybody remember what that specific thing was called? Yeah, Jamari just said it, the DNS server. So there's a process called DNS that is using taking your domain name and reverse mapping it to a IP address. And basically that IP address, remember, corresponds to a server, right? So basically when we're typing in this thing on the browser, it's basically going to return with some server, and kind of like Benjamin was saying, a specific port. It is using a TCP over IP protocol to do that work. But the DNS is giving us an IP address so that when I go to that particular domain, it's going to return back the IP of that server. And that server is listening for requests, right? So technically, if you think about it, this domain name is almost like the same as kind of this, right? This, but except localhost maps to a specific IP address. I think it's let's see if I do this, if there's right. So my localhost IP address is this 127.0.0.1. Clearly, if you tried to do this on your machine, it's not going to work because this is local to my machine, and it's not like this port is actually open for external web traffic. But what you see here is this IP address, right, at this port is returning this file, right? What we see here are just numbers, but what's the difference between, if y'all, like we were just talking about, what's going on with when I take this domain to what shows up, right? there really is no difference in that this is eventually going to get mapped to something like this, and then something's going to return. That's what the servers are responsible for creating for us, is what happens when someone goes to a specific route. So on Google, right? If I go to Google and then I go to like images, there's like a whole different path here at the slash, right? So it's google.com/blurb, random blurb, and there's a couple parameters passed in there. So what the server has to do is take this inbound request and basically take a look at what is the route that this particular request is looking to receive data from, right? So let's add another example to our to this hello world scenario that we just created, right? And just to show you the point that I'm trying to make here. So at the first home route, right? This kind of just slash, this is our root, our index route. So whenever someone just goes to localhost 3000, right? This is the route that's going to get returned. But if I want to create a different route based on that path, right? I can do something similar. And let's say the path is going to be slash, let's just say welcome. And I'm going to just say different thing, welcome to the server side, right? So what's going on here? Well, here I'm defining a new route on the server. This route is going to only occur when the user goes to slash welcome, right? And when the user goes to slash welcome, when the client requests slash welcome, I should say, this particular route is going to respond with passing another string. And this string is going to be just a different message right now. So first we'll save this, and because I made a change to the server as it was running, I'm going to stop the server, just use Control-C to stop it. And then I'm going to just relaunch the server. So now, right, I'm going to just refresh this and go back to :3000. And then I'm going to go to slash test. This is also cool to see. I forgot what I named it, but you can see that clearly going to this route on our localhost, it says cannot get test. Oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So now we're seeing some error. Maybe I'll pull up the Chrome dev tools in a second and show us that. But I had actually named this, instead of test, I named it welcome. So when I go to slash welcome, right, boom, there's my message, welcome to the server side. So clearly my routes will respond to what the server is expecting here in the back. So the most important thing is that the most important thing here is to see that the routes correlate to what the server will return and respond. So real quick, I'm gonna pause. Any questions, or if this makes sense so far, what you're seeing, just give me a thumbs up. Okay, bet. Dope. Yeah, this is a really interesting concept, right? Using the server, we can create different routes that respond to requests that users or client machines might be processing. So this is a really important part of the process in general. So from this, right, there's like some more, it gets a little bit more interesting, right? So clearly, a lot of what we're talking about, the express kind of documentation speaks to it here, right? We created a server that's listening on port 3000 for connections. The original route that we created, right, the index route, is responding with hello world for any requests at the root URL, which is the slash, right? So whenever you put in a general kind of domain name, right? So if I go to like nytimes.com and just press enter, this is actually the same as doing this. Basically saying, oh, go to the root route. So most times whenever you just type in the general domain name, it'll default go to the root route. But sometimes you might see somebody actually put the slash, which is explicitly saying go to the root route on that specific server. So we create routes by defining what is called the path for that route, and then what the what's going to happen when a client outreaches for that particular route. For one of the reasons why we use libraries like Express is because it makes it very easy for our server to know that, hey, you know, a route that someone's trying to go to actually doesn't exist. And then it will do stuff like respond with that 404 not found, like when I went to the slash test, right? And it kind of gave us this, hey, cannot get test. If I look at this in the inspector, because remember, all of the stuff going on in this is happening with requests, like there's actual requests being sent. So if I look over the network, right, clearly this test route /test came back with a 404 status, right? For all those of y'all who remember when we first started talking about requests and responses, 404 was the response status code that comes back when there was a client side error, right? And clearly there was a client side error in that I was trying to request a route that doesn't actually exist on the server. So this is where all these things kind of connect now that we are here. But clearly the route that I did create that works is welcome. And when I go to the welcome route, this route comes back with this information. But one thing that's like interesting, if you look, it came back with a 304, which technically would be a redirect route. But what's interesting about that is because, and maybe we'll get into it in a little bit, we didn't actually send a specific status code back for this route, but we'll do that in a second. But you can tell it was successful because it actually went through. But go ahead, Benjamin. I see you have a question, bro.
Yeah, I have a question. So when I'm thinking of cybersecurity, there's like a technique that is used to like map out a website where you can see all the routes available. Now, I know in some cases, some of these routes are just like private or closed or not like, or like you could say hidden. Is that a thing where you have just hidden routes that only like certain people can access, but are just like hidden and like not like protected? Like, meaning that if I knew that route, regardless of, you know, whether I work for the company or not, I can access. And like, it's because I don't really know how it works, like actually mapping out like all the routes. This is like a reconnaissance technique in order to see like what maybe there's like a place where you can go like to move through and find like an exploit. So like, yeah, I guess my question is like, are there hidden routes that you can actually make, and what would be like the purpose of doing that? I guess for like employee stuff and whatever. I don't know. You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?
I get what you're saying. It's a great question. And I'll try my best to answer it in a short period of time. So we can secure routes definitely using frameworks. That's another reason why we use libraries like Express, because they come built in with the methods that we would need to do stuff like securing routes and things of that nature. Otherwise, you'd have to do that yourself, right? So most times before returning anything, we can actually do some security on the side of the server to make sure that like things like that, like you're talking about, don't actually happen. I'd say the purpose of doing that is literally like you said, like, because people be doing nefarious things on machines all over the place, all the time. So making sure that you secure your routes is actually a really important part of working in the back end. So I think a lot of times, I mean, there's cybersecurity issues across the stack. So on the front end, there's things you want to kind of make sure you maintain. There's also things on the server side that you want to maintain as well to keep your sites safe from like malintended users and stuff like that.
Right. Thank you. I appreciate you answering that. Now, I guess this is not a cybersecurity question, but when somebody's developing a website, right?
Yeah.
What would be like an example that would require them to make a route that isn't open to just the general public? Would that just be like for, let's say, like an employee page?
Yeah. I mean, we have protected routes for a lot of things. Like most protected routes, like the most common use case is like routes that are behind authentication, right? Like if I were to try to log into like a social media app without logging in, right? Most times it doesn't allow me to actually go to that route because of the fact that I'm not logged in, right? So that's like a simple use case for something like that, right? It's like protecting a route from folks who aren't actually authenticated in the service that you're providing or whatever. But sometimes you might just be using the route to not for someone to go to like as a website, like, oh, like, hey, I'm just going to the browser and doing this thing. But maybe maybe you're using that route to actually process data that someone is passing in, which like I said, we'll get into in a little bit, which is just talking about the different types of requests that we can send to the server now that we've created it. But sometimes what we're seeing here is we're using the GET request, which is the request that we use from the client to say, hey, I want to get information from this route. But there's other methods, HTTP methods that we use commonly to communicate with servers that aren't about showing a file or showing anything at the end for the client, but more about processing some data like the post request. Either way, we create the server to just kind of respond to those inbound inquiries, whether it's a GET request or a post request.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that answer. A great explanation. I'm getting a better understanding of it now. I appreciate it.
I don't pay this man to say this, you know what I'm saying? I just come and
No, he
show
does.
up and teach. I just come and teach. But before I push on, I just want to do a pulse check. Are y'all rocking with me? Y'all kind of get this understanding what the server is responsible for, what we would be doing on the back end, which is creating these routes that are responding to kind of different traffic stuff from the client. If so, just give me a thumbs up so I know that we're on the same page here. Thanks, Omar. I saw yours, bro. Appreciate y'all. Cool. I see a couple thumbs. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm actually looking because it's actually helpful for me to know pulse checks and stuff. All right, dope. Dope. Appreciate y'all. So yeah, again, this is Express, and like as you can see, in a simple sense, what it was responsible for was using JavaScript code to allow us to just define what we needed to do to create the server. It defined the port we were going to run. It gives us a framework for defining routes. And in those routes, it gives us the necessary functions we need to send data as a response to those requests and process inbound requests at different routes, right? All of those things, generally speaking, are what these backend frameworks allow us to accomplish. So earlier when I was talking about, with Python, you might see Flask. If you look at the documentation for Flask, you'll see that a lot of this is actually really similar, except it's in Python, right? So when you think about kind of let me just see a minimal application. Let's see what this is doing. So look at this. This is the Flask version of a similar app that's running a server that's going to listen for specific routes, right? Without knowing any Python, but knowing what we just talked about creating routes and whatnot, right? You might be able to see that a lot of this is very similar, right? So give me a thumbs up if you can see that, so I know I'm not just talking to myself, right? Right? It's just different because it's Python, right? So server-side stuff is like that, right? If you understand the concept of, I need to create a server, I need to create routes, I need to do this, you can figure out how to do that with any language that you choose to do it. You can do it in Ruby, you can do it in Java, you can do it in Python, you can do it in JavaScript. it depends on whatever your preference is as a developer, what your team preference is when you're working with groups, and what you're trying to reasonably accomplish with that backend service that you're creating. So the last point I'll talk about is, I don't necessarily think this is going to show it, but so clearly we're just seeing like a very simple server that's creating a GET request for us. GET requests are the most simple kind of requests because they don't require you to pass data. But server-side stuff can get more complicated as it relates to you processing someone sending in data. That I think probably is they're gonna get into that in here, right? So here we see an example of a GET request in Express, like that we see, it's just responding to hello world. But in the post request, right, which is the different HTTP method where you as a client are sending data to a server, we can see that there's your server can designate whether or not someone is sending a request as a GET request or as a post request, right? So if I go back here and I just basically copy the same thing, but change it from GET to post, even at the same route, right? Here I'm going to say, instead of hello world, I'm going to say receive the post request, right? So what's interesting is that whenever I go to just the browser, right, clearly I can only see that I can only see the GET version, the GET request version, because the browser, when you go to a URL, this is how we know what's happening in the backend is we're making a GET request to this specific server. So after the DNS stuff happens and it reverse maps our IP address for us, it proceeds to make a GET request, an HTTP GET request to that particular server to get back information, right? In order to make a post request, I need to have a way more specific, I have to structure a way more specific networking call to the server that basically specifies itself as a post request. One tool that is really popular in the world of kind of backend development and server-side stuff is an app called Postman, which allows you to structure out networking requests and test like requests that you're making to different backend services, APIs, and things of that nature. I'm gonna just see real quick if I can just do a quick Postman request to that local server that's running, and see if it works. I actually haven't tried it, so you know, could not work, but we'll see. We'll see if it works. And hopefully it don't take too long. But basically, Postman is a really cool app that lets you basically specify different URLs that you're trying to send a network request to, and you can then process the network request through Postman and test what, you know, if you're test those requests in this sandbox. So right, I could do a GET request. Let's see if I do the localhost, if it actually will pull back the information. So press send. Okay, cool. So it actually does work on my machine, right? So we know that it's sending back hello world. If I switch this from GET to post though, and I press send here. Okay. Oh, my bad. I know why that's happening. So whenever I make a change on the server, if I don't actually restart the server, that change isn't going to be reflected in the current version of the server. So every time you make that change or change to your server, you got to just make sure that the running server, you stop it and then you start it again. So I'm gonna start it over again, and hopefully that gets rid of that error that we were just seeing. Okay, so the server is now running. So then if I go back and make this post request again, dope. So now we get this receive the post request from the Postman. So dope. So now we can actually test those post requests using Postman here. One thing we'll note, the status came back with a 200 level status. It shows you the time it took to take. It also shows you the processes that happened in making that networking request. So some of the things behind the scenes of the post request. Dope. So yeah, Postman is a great tool for like kind of just testing API calls and server-side calls in general. But yeah, basic routing is basically about this, right? When you're creating your servers, you're going to determine the different routes that you need to create. And based on what a user is trying to accomplish on those routes, you're going to have to choose which HTTP method is the most important method to use, right? The path would be the particular, slash blah, blah, blah that the user would, or the client would be requesting. And then the handler is always a function that's going to be called that proceeds to take in the request from that particular request and create the response object so that you can respond appropriately to the request. And this whole general thing is what happens in backend programming on the server side. Like I said, whether you're using JavaScript or not, this is what you're working in when you talk about server-side programming, is creating functions that respond to different types of requests, right? And here's an example of all those different HTTP methods that we could use. So last thing I want to talk about today, just while I have kind of Express going up, is the process of like serving static files in Express. So with the server, right, we can create, instead of just sending back a string, right, we can send back a lot of really interesting stuff. We can send back images, we can send back CSS files, JavaScript files, HTML files. And Express has a specific method that we use in order to do that. And so first you have to kind of make it so that those files are able to be used statically. And then you're able to then make use of those files in your server, right? So this is showing how you can create a folder of files that will be public and then return those files in your Express Express code. So I was gonna show so the way it works in general is, this is basically what it's showing, is like sometimes if you have specific directories that you have to call, you can you have to specify those there. And so some of what you were talking about, Benjamin, it was like you can use Express to do things like create virtual path prefixes, so that you can also create like kind of some layers behind, like so that users don't kind of just get immediate access to certain things. But with this example here, I just was trying to create an example of how this might work for us, right? So let's say in the case of what we've been doing, right, we have our HTML work, right? So I might create a folder. Oops, that's not the folder. So I create a folder, right? And inside of this folder, I call it public. So inside of this folder, maybe I have those files that I was working on before for my project, right? My index.html, maybe I have my styles.css, and right, so I have those important kind of front end files. So in the sense of like what we're talking about here, right? I might want to return these files as part of my server request, right? So first, I'm gonna just go to my my awesome HTML, my little awesome website that I created already, right? And just grab that HTML file that I made. Super simple, but I'm just doing this so that y'all can think about it from your perspective, right? So I grabbed this HTML file and I can just paste it back in here. So, right, so here's my HTML file, and then my styles.css. I don't even remember if I wrote anything in there, but I'll just take a look. All right, so go to the styles.css file. It's taking its sweet time. Why does it take it so long? It's crazy. It's kind of wild. It's kind of wild. Okay, I don't know. Interesting. Okay, well, for the sake of what I'm trying to show y'all, it's not as important, but you get the gist, right? I have my HTML file. I could make a styles. I could make a quick CSS file if I wanted to. And then it could be linked here. But the most important thing is just that I got this HTML file here. So basically, if we go back to the to what the Express was saying, is we can actually serve up static files, right? So it says, imagine the case that let's say we have a directory named public, which is the files for the directory that we have, right? So we should be able to then load these files. So by using this express function, it makes that directory inside of our project public. So I'll go back to the actual Express project. And then in here, I'll just kind of get that in there. So I'll say app.use express.static and then public. Y'all can't see that, right? So this will turn this public directory. It will make this actually public so that on the server, I can now get back any files that I save in there. So if I save this now, remember any change that I make to the server, I got to stop the running server first to see that change live. So I'll just restart the server. And then it was basically saying that now that you've done that, you should be able to go to that localhost with the files that you actually were talking about. So now I should be able to go to localhost / index.html and pull back up that HTML file. Oops. Pull back up that HTML file that's served in the public directory, right? So it said any files that are saved in here will be accessible via whatever the corresponding name of the file is, right? So this now is allowing us to then pull back up any of those static files that we might want to pull up. And dope. So that would be a way for us to not only create the server, but then return that HTML. But clearly, that's not really kind of the flow that we normally use, right? Normally what we see is, hey, when I go to this route on the server, I see the HTML file, right? So how might we do something like that is a little bit different in the is a little bit different. Oh, well, I don't know how much they're gonna show this in here, but basically, right, each library has a way for us to do something along the lines of bringing back our files. So this is another project that I was working on to show some folks off like Express stuff in a more sophisticated example. But basically, I can use Express to also send files back to through like these requests. So in this case, right, I just want to figure out the path of a particular file that I would want to send and send that back in my request as a response. So here in this example that we've been working on, right, maybe what I want to do is when someone goes to the main route, I just want to send them, and instead of making that whole directory public, right, maybe I just want to send them the index.html file. So here I can use the response object, send the file, and this is just some Express code that needs to kind of be in there to get everything to work. And I'll just bring this in as well, the path. Basically, I just need to take the directory that I'm looking to take this from and create the path that I want to return. So I think this should work, but let me, before I run it, stop the server. Just make sure I do this. I think path is already included in this, but let me just make sure. So this is me going a little bit more into the weeds of some JavaScript like syntactic stuff. But the point is, with servers, we can clearly return files as part of our response to specific requests. So here, what I did was basically use the JavaScript to allow for me to create a path that is going to that index.html file, in the hope that now that I relaunch the server, if I go to just the main route, this index.html file is what gets returned. So you might not see it because I didn't really change anything in here. So to say hello from Express, this is to demonstrate how we can send a file back from Express. And because I'm feeling it, because I got it to work and without much hassle, I'm just gonna go grab a GIF, you know what I'm saying, just to top it all off. And I just want something success. I just want to feel like, yeah, I did that. So I'm just using GIF from Giphy real quick. Find one real fast. We'll use my man Stephen Colbert. So let me just find the Adrian's. I like to do this. Open a new tab. Grab the address and let's see if I can make this work using just an image. Dope. And then again, little changes require me to relaunch the server. But now if I refresh this, get back. There we go. So now my server, right, is running and is returning back this particular file, which is my index.html file. How I did that, just so I can just make that clear for y'all, if you're going to follow along and try to do that in on your own with Express. So we saw that with Express, we can just really clearly send a file if we make it public. and most times you'll create a public directory that has like things like your HTML file and stuff like that. But in this case, I used a different method, which is a more specific function that comes in Express. So the reason I didn't really talk through this is because this is very specific to Express and JavaScript. But basically, every route has two objects that you can use to refer to. One is going to be referring to the request. So this will allow you to process the inbound request from the client, and the response would be the object that you get to build and then send back to the client as a server. So the response object in libraries like Express has a the response object in libraries like Express has very specific things tied to has very specific functions that you can use. So here you can see on the Express documentation, there's functions that the request body can use. Then there's functions that the response object can use as well, right? So one of the response object functions in Express is send file, which allows for you to send a specific file to which basically allows you to send a specific file to a to your client, right? When I use this file before, when I use this function before, it takes in a path so that you can basically say like what path, like where is that file that you're trying to send. So I ended up importing another JavaScript library called path that allowed for me to just very eloquently create a path out of this these strings for the folder it was in, and then the file, right? And then from that, I was able to just create the string that was gonna get returned back. I don't necessarily know if you need to do this whole thing, because the send file, I think, can take in just a string. So let me see if I do it like this without this complicated line, if it actually does what we expect it to do. So it's not public, it's not HTML. So stop, run again. So, okay, so yeah, so the path library and this whole thing allowed us to create a particular path to that specific file in our folder that we're talking about here. So I had to install that and use npm to install this. And then doing that allowed me to then create the path to that particular file and return it as a response. Again, every language has different, every framework has a different way of doing it, but the idea is that each framework will allow you to do something like this. So in JavaScript, right, a couple steps, you got to install the path and then join the path to a like the specific place, because like you all probably see, this index.html is in this public folder. So basically what this bit of JavaScript is doing is it's using that path library to join the directory name with the public, with the names of the files that it was trying to get back. So this created a path for me, and then the res.send file basically took that path and said, hey, when the user goes to this root route, right, send them back this file. And that's why now when I go to this, I gotta restart this. But now when I go to the server, right, oops, I didn't save it, my bad. That's why now when I go to the server, I'm able to get that file to come back up. But yeah, each library does something of similar, right? But it just kind of requires you to learn or look at the API documentation to identify like what you might have to do to get it to work on your end. So yeah, I know that the last part kind of got thrown off a little bit, but if you understand basically the concept of like using these libraries to create servers that create routes and allow for us to respond and return to the route or respond to different routes that people are trying to reach, you're in a good place. So if you feel like that part is clear for you, like kind of what the server is responsible for, what your responsibility would be if somebody's like, hey, you're going to work on the server side, just give me a thumbs up. And that was really the intent of this whole thing. Dope. John, go ahead, bro.
So for sites, is this usually how ads are handled? Like they're more of a back end thing?
Describe what you mean more.
Like you know when you go on a site sometimes they'll have like pop-up ads and like just general advertisements for whatever they have. Is that like a back end thing?
I would say that's more of a front. It's kind of a mix because the ad is showing up on the front end, right? But it's pulling information from the back end. Like the ad might be sending data to some database from the fact that you're looking at it on the back end, but it's the visible part of it is coming from the fact that it's on the front end.
All right, got you.
Yeah, but what made you think about ads like in this particular case?
Cause you were using the server to send the GIF there. So I was thinking like, oh, maybe that's how they handle ads.
Oh yeah, but no, I used the server to send this whole HTML file. So
Yeah,
not
but
only
you can,
yeah, go ahead.
but you can also use it to like send specific stuff, right?
Yeah, I could definitely do that. So like, yeah, so I guess to what you're saying is like maybe you built an app that is going to place an ad into some HTML that exists. And maybe you can write a backend function, like a server side function that basically will process some data that you send it that says something like maybe like where John's IP address is located, like in terms of what city is he in. And then you can get that information and then send back some specific HTML that will process that. But a lot of that stuff you could do from the front end is what I'm trying to say. But like maybe like the thing that the back end is responsible for, and this is an important thing to say as a takeaway, the back end runs some code, right? So in these examples, I was just really doing a lot of like very lightweight things because I know that y'all don't really know all of JavaScript yet, but like res.send, right? This is just sending a string right now. But before I send this string, I could do all types of stuff, right? Maybe I have like some data, you know what I'm saying? Like, and the data has like user ID, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? Right, or something, you know what I mean? Like imagine like I could have a bunch of data and I could be doing some like function things, I could be like really like I could be doing a lot more complicated stuff inside of these backend functions that like I'm just throwing up random code right now, but just to show you that like this could be getting being way more involved, and then eventually, right, then like maybe like you're sending that data back to the client, right? So the backend, when you're in the backend, you're writing functions in your specific language of choice that is going to do stuff that is going to eventually turn back into stuff that gets sent to the client, or just things that Another use that we use for servers like this is if you're going to save data, right? You might write from your server routes, and this goes back to Benjamin, your question. Sometimes you might have routes that just are meant to communicate to your server or to your database, right? And a user is not necessarily supposed to go to that route, but you might have a route for the user that's like /save data or something. But then in this body, in the body where you have the opportunity to write more, in the body of the code where you have an opportunity to write more specific code for execution, right? You might be doing things like reaching out to the server and then sending the data to the server, confirming that you did everything right before you end up sending anything back to the user in any of these cases. So as a backend dev, you're going to be responsible for processing the routes, but also writing the logical things that your server needs to do in order to process and pass the data that the user's
So
using.
you're in a sense controlling like the traffic, like the data traffic.
Yes, yes, among other things. You're controlling the traffic to the server, and what happens or doesn't happen when someone goes to specific routes on a specific port of the machine, is one thing that you might do on the back end. Back-end devs also are the ones that typically are responsible for like establishing databases and stuff like that in that sense. Then you pass the data back to someone who on the front end might visualize that data for a user or turn that data into something else, right? So example would be Facebook front end or Instagram front end engineers would write all the HTML that would allow for the logic of a feed to show up in a structured sense of HTML, which if I asked y'all to make an Instagram feed app on HTML, right? That would, a lot of y'all would look at like, yo, that's actually really difficult, because it is. There's a lot of different things you need to do with the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end to make that app work. But the Instagram backend team would be working on this server to be creating the routes that allow for you to get the data from your database. Make sure that a user is authenticated before you get the data in the database. Make sure that whenever somebody presses the like button in the front end, that there's a corresponding call from the back end that then updates that information in the database, right? That's how those two things would be separated. Server side team will be responding to requests and that the client side team is making, but the client side team might be making requests to the server side team's servers stuff to get the data that it needs to do to actually make the applications show the data that it needs to show. Does that make sense?
Yeah, perfect sense.
Does that make sense to everybody else? Just give me a thumbs up, because this is an important part of the concepts. Well, makes sense to my man Omar and to Nikita. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody else. Thanks. Where y'all? Well, this is a little lightweight intro. I say lightweight, but clearly there's a lot of complex stuff that's going on in the back end. But this is an introduction to what the back end is, and specifically the back end in JavaScript. Again, like I showed y'all at the beginning, we could be doing all of the stuff we're doing here with just JavaScript. We can do in any other backend language. It just is the case that I chose to do it in JavaScript. So I encourage you to think about what type of backend language would you want to write in? Would it be JavaScript? Would it be Java, Python? Which is your preference? And for you to look up and maybe try your best to create something like this for yourself. On Wednesday, I'm going to be giving out another challenge kind of for us to work on, which will be you creating a server. And we'll talk more about it. I'll write more about it in the Slack, because I don't want to prolong class right now. And I got to kind of gather my thoughts on it, but I'll write more on it and send that out for y'all. But basically the idea here is we create servers that respond to requests from the clients. Servers get created on specific ports. We can access those ports on the machine if we know the IP address of the specific machine we're talking about. And all of the networking underlying networking that happens when we make these requests is happens by way of the ways in which the server is established and makes certain documents public or accessible to people, to other members of the world who are using and accessing your site and stuff like that. So yeah, this is the little intro to backend stuff. Like I mentioned, we talked about front end stuff. Now we talked about backend stuff. After we get an example hacking on it for ourselves, we'll then start talking about connecting the dots. And that's when things I think will get interesting, because that's when you'll be able to see a whole full stack application put together, start to finish. So yeah, appreciate y'all wonderful people for rocking with me. And I will talk to y'all soon. Oh yeah, we don't have class on Wednesday. No, you're right. We don't have class. We don't have class on Wednesday. We got class next Monday. So I'll put stuff up though.
We don't have class Monday either.
Oh well, I'll put stuff up for y'all tonight and Tuesday for y'all to get done by the end of the week, and it'll be due before our next class. So I'll put that up for y'all in the next couple hours or so. So you'll see a ping on there for yourselves. But yeah, fam.